The first sign is not gold, not a mummy, and not the gleam of an untouched coffin. It is colour, deep beneath the dry ground of South Saqqara. At the bottom of a vertical shaft opened during the final weeks of 2024, archaeologists enter a small chamber and find walls that still seem to hold their breath. Red, blue, yellow, green, and black remain caught in the carved signs. A limestone ceiling has been painted to imitate the veins of costly red granite. Around a niche once intended for the containers of the dead man's organs, traces of gilding still cling to the surface. The chamber is compact, almost intimate, and it has survived in a condition that feels improbable after more than 4,000 years. Yet the room is also empty. The coffin is gone. The body is gone. Nearly everything that could be carried away vanished in antiquity. What remains is the part the robbers could not easily steal: the architecture, the inscriptions, and the painted identity of a man who had once stood close to royal power. The discovery comes in December 2024 during the work of the French-Swiss Archaeological Mission at South Saqqara. The mission is not searching for this man. Its wider investigation concerns the elite cemetery surrounding the pyramid complex of Tetinebefou and, among other objectives, the lost mastaba of the celebrated official Weni. Beneath a landscape crowded with pyramids, shafts, chapels, corridors, and collapsed superstructures, one search can uncover someone entirely unexpected. When the announcement follows on January 6, 2025, newspapers quickly describe the owner as a royal doctor, dentist, plant specialist, even a magician. Those words are compelling, but dangerous if detached from the evidence. The man in the tomb is not a fantasy sorcerer, and the chamber is not a medical laboratory sealed in sand. It is a funerary space, and its inscriptions preserve titles rather than case histories. The mystery begins with a strange imbalance. The walls record a career of unusual range and prestige, but the objects that might have shown how he worked have disappeared. No confirmed surgical kit lies on the floor. No medical papyrus waits in a box. No list of plants, prescriptions, or named patients has been recovered. Even the man himself is absent. The tomb preserves status without biography, authority without daily practice, and a professional identity without the tools that could explain it. History has left the title page of a book while removing every chapter that followed. The chamber itself must be understood correctly. It is not a vast, intact mastaba rising above the desert. Most of the structure that once marked the burial at ground level has been lost. What survives below is a small underground vaulted tomb, reached through a vertical shaft and roofed with mud brick. French archaeologists use a term that literally evokes an oven-like form, but in practical terms it is a shaft tomb with a compact vaulted burial chamber. Its importance does not come from monumental size. It comes from the density of information preserved in a confined space. Fine hieroglyphs were incised before being carefully painted. Some signs used to write the owner's name are only a few millimeters high. The ceiling's imitation of red granite transforms ordinary limestone into an image of elite material. The robbers reached the burial long before modern archaeologists. Evidence suggests that they broke beneath the floor slabs to remove the coffin and grave goods. Their intrusion stripped the chamber of nearly everything portable, yet it did not destroy the walls. Later construction covered the area with a massive block of masonry, accidentally sheltering the room from further damage and from quarrying. The result is a paradoxical survival. Theft emptied the tomb, but later architecture protected its decoration. Scholars still debate details of the owner's date and career. but the chamber makes one fact unmistakable. Someone invested extraordinary care in making his titles visible after death. His name is read by the excavators as Tetinebefou, though English language reports often render it as Tetinebefou. It appears not on an intact coffin, because no such coffin remains, but on architectural elements: the false door, a limestone lintel in the shaft, and surrounding inscriptions. To a modern eye, it may look like an entrance that should open onto another room. In Egyptian funerary belief, however, it marked a threshold between the living and the dead, a symbolic passage through which the deceased could receive offerings. But here the body is no longer hidden, it is missing. There can be no examination of Tetinebefou's bones, no reconstruction of his age, injuries, diseases, or cause of death. There is no face to compare with the painted figures, no residue in a vessel that can confidently be called medicine, and no instrument that can be placed in his hand. What survives suggests that he occupied an exceptional position, yet the evidence remains incomplete where curiosity presses hardest. The chamber announces that he was important, but it does not reveal what happened when a patient stood before him in pain. It does not tell us whether he treated a ruler, a royal relative, a court official, or all of them. It does not show whether his remedies succeeded. The painted walls become both revelation and barrier. Their colours bring Tetinebefou close, but their language is formal. They were designed to sustain him in death, not to satisfy future historians. The vessels and foods belong primarily to the grammar of funerary provision. They should not be mistaken for labelled medicines. The images do not show him performing an operation or examining a patient. They show what an elite Egyptian wished to possess: eternally nourishment, ritual order, titles, and a name protected against oblivion. Yet among those titles are four that form an extraordinary constellation: royal physician, chief of dentists, director of medicinal plants, and ritual specialist of the goddess Serket. Together they open a door more complicated than the false door on the wall. They lead into a world where treatment, plants, spoken ritual, divine protection, venom, pain, and royal authority were overlapping parts of a single system of healing. For now, the chamber remains silent beneath Saqqara. After recording and conservation, it is sealed again, protected from the light that briefly revealed it. The body has vanished, the coffin has vanished, and the people who once descended with offerings have vanished as well. But the colours remain underground, surrounding a name that survived because it was carved into stone. Tetinebefou returns not through his remains, but through the claims made about him. The first question is no longer simply who was buried here. It is how a man could hold so many kinds of healing authority, and why the tomb that preserves his status refuses to tell us how he used it. The question of how Tetinebefou entered the archaeological record becomes more intriguing when the excavation is viewed from above, before anyone descends into the shaft. The mission working at South Saqqara was not following a clue that pointed toward a royal physician. It was pursuing a different absence, one already famous in Egyptology: the lost mastaba of Weni, or Uni, a powerful official whose career had been recorded elsewhere in unusually vivid terms. Since 2022, the French-Swiss team had been examining the elite cemetery around the pyramid complex of Papyri, tracing walls, shafts, chapels, and disturbed burials across ground shaped by centuries of building and destruction. Tetinebefou emerged not as the expected answer, but as the kind of discovery archaeology often produces when one mystery opens onto another. Saqqara makes such surprises possible because it is not a single cemetery. It is a vast funerary landscape serving ancient Memphis across an extraordinary span of time. Kings built pyramids there, officials raised mastabas, priests, administrators, craftsmen, military leaders, physicians, and families of status sought places within the sacred geography surrounding royal monuments. Each generation encountered structures left by those before it, then added new architecture, cut fresh shafts, reused old spaces, or buried walls under later construction. The desert appears still, but beneath the surface it is crowded with decisions. A trench opened to follow one wall may strike the edge of another tomb. A shaft assumed to belong to one complex may descend toward a different owner. Even careful maps cannot restore every vanished superstructure, especially where stone has been quarried and mud brick has eroded into the surrounding sand. The pyramid complex of Papyri forms an important center within this landscape. Papyri ruled during the 6th dynasty, and the cemetery around his monument attracted members of the court and other high-ranking people whose careers were tied to royal administration. Proximity mattered. To be buried near a king's pyramid was to place one's afterlife within a powerful ritual environment, close to offerings, priestly activity, and the continuing memory of kingship. The arrangement was never merely decorative. Tomb location expressed hierarchy, access, and political belonging. What survives in the record suggests that Tetinebefou belonged to this elite world, even though the identity of the ruler he served remains uncertain. The mission's search for Weni gives the discovery a deeper historical texture. Weni is known as one of the most remarkable officials of the Old Kingdom because an autobiographical inscription describes his rise through royal service, his judicial responsibilities, expeditions, and military command. His career crossed reigns and revealed how a capable official might accumulate power under several kings. His mastaba, however, has not been securely located in the area where the mission is working. Archaeologists therefore examine the surrounding cemetery not only to find a single monument, but to reconstruct the social and architectural setting in which such an official might have been buried. Every tomb helps refine the map, every name changes the pattern. Tetinebefou's chamber appears within this broader investigation like a hidden footnote that suddenly becomes a major document. The surface marker associated with his burial has mostly vanished, so there was no monumental facade announcing that a medical specialist lay below. The route to him was a shaft. The room at its base was small. Nothing about the surviving exterior could have predicted the richness of the decoration or the unusual combination of titles inside. This is one reason the discovery matters. It demonstrates how much of the elite cemetery may remain reduced to underground traces, with the visible landscape giving little indication of the lives once commemorated beneath it. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. Saqqara rewards patience precisely because its most compelling stories rarely appear in isolation. Tetinebefou cannot be understood only as an individual doctor in a sealed room. His burial belongs to a network of monuments tied to the royal court, to the institutions around Papyri's pyramid, and to the competition among officials to secure remembrance near the center of power. The tomb's position links healing to administration and ritual before any title is even translated. The archaeological process also resists the clean sequence often imagined in popular accounts. There is no single moment when a team brushes away sand and instantly recognizes an intact tomb. Work proceeds through measurement, excavation, comparison, conservation, photography, drawing, and repeated reading. Mud brick can resemble compacted earth. Walls may survive only in courses near the foundation. Shafts can be filled with debris from ancient robbery, later building collapse and modern disturbance. A chamber may be discovered physically before its owner is identified historically. In Tetinebefou's case, the name and offices emerge from the architecture and inscriptions, while the wider significance becomes clear only after specialists study the titles, artistic style, and relationship to nearby remains. This context also corrects the seductive idea that archaeologists set out to find famous people and simply succeed. The mission's original objective shaped where it worked, but the ground retained its own logic. Tetinebefou had been absent from modern maps not because he was insignificant, but because the architecture above him was nearly erased and the burial below had been robbed. His return depended on investigators asking a different question nearby. The search for Weni created the path that led to a physician whose career had not been expected at all. There is quiet irony in that sequence. Weni is known through a long account of actions but still lacks a securely identified tomb in this excavation zone. Tetinebefou has a decorated burial chamber and a cluster of impressive titles, yet almost no narrative of what he actually did. One official survives through biography without a recovered monument here. The other survives through a monument without biography. Together they reveal the uneven machinery of historical memory. Stone can preserve a name while losing a life. Text can preserve a career while leaving the body's resting place uncertain. No single form of evidence is complete. As the team continues across the cemetery, Tetinebefou's tomb becomes more than an accidental find. It adds another high-ranking specialist to the social world around the papyri complex and shows that medical authority could be commemorated with exceptional care. Yet it also deepens the central problem. The location tells us that he belonged near power. The titles will soon tell us how he wished that power to be described, but the precise king, the patience, and the daily workings of his office remain beyond the surviving walls. To approach those questions, the investigation must first return underground and examine the unusual form of the tomb itself, because even its architecture warns us not to imagine a grand mastaba standing untouched above the sand. The architecture beneath the sand is modest enough to be misleading. Anyone imagining a monumental mastaba with broad facades, offering chapels, storerooms, and an imposing superstructure would be picturing the wrong tomb. What the excavation preserves is far smaller and more vulnerable, a narrow vertical shaft descending several meters into the ground, and at its base a compact burial chamber covered by a mud brick vault. The French term used by the excavators, tombe en four, literally suggests an oven-shaped tomb, but the expression describes form rather than function. It is better understood as a small underground vaulted burial, entered through a shaft, with whatever once marked it above ground now mostly lost. Unlike the great stone mastabas that dominate popular images of Saqqara, this type could leave almost no visible profile once its upper elements decayed. The surviving chamber is therefore not the entire monument, but the deepest and most protected fraction of it. That distinction matters because the monument visible in antiquity and the chamber surviving today were not the same thing. Tetinebefou's family, colleagues, and offering priests would not have approached an anonymous hole in the desert. There was almost certainly some surface arrangement that identified the burial and provided a place for ritual activity, even if its exact shape cannot now be reconstructed with confidence. Mud brick erodes. Limestone blocks are removed and reused. Chapels collapse. Walls are cut by later builders, and centuries of wind flattened distinctions between architecture and earth. The evidence remains incomplete, so the missing upper structure should not be restored in imagination as something grander than the archaeology allows. Below ground, however, the chamber survives with unusual force. Its scale concentrates as tension. The walls stand close enough that the painted inscriptions surround the visitor rather than recede into distance. A limestone ceiling, instead of being left plain, was painted with irregular red bands and dark markings to imitate polished red granite. This was visual transformation through paint common stone, made to resemble a prestigious material associated with royal and elite architecture. The effect did not require actual granite to be hauled into the chamber. It required skilled craftsmen who understood how colour could simulate value, permanence, and status. The roof above that decorated space was built in mud brick, shaped into a vault. Such a construction demanded practical knowledge of pressure and balance, because the chamber had to resist the weight of the ground above it. Mud brick is often treated as humble material beside cut stone, yet much of ancient Egyptian architecture depended on it. Houses, magazines, enclosure walls, workspaces, and parts of tomb complexes were built from bricks formed from Nile mud and organic temper. Under dry conditions, they could endure for extraordinary lengths of time. Once exposed, however, they were vulnerable to rain, wind, salts, and human traffic. The room's survival underground is therefore partly a result of burial itself. The earth that concealed it also helped preserve it. The vertical shaft created a controlled descent between the world of the living and the sealed space of the dead. During the funeral, the coffin and burial equipment would have been lowered into darkness, perhaps with ropes and careful coordination. The opening could then be closed and the upper area prepared for continuing commemoration. None of this means the shaft had a mystical function independent of practical engineering. But in Egyptian burial culture, practicality and symbolism often overlapped. Moving downward into the Western cemetery physically separated the deceased from ordinary life, while placing the body in a protected chamber designed for eternity. Yet eternity proved negotiable. Ancient robbers found a way into the burial, and their method altered the chamber's history. Rather than preserving the floor as an untouched boundary, they penetrated beneath slabs to reach the coffin and portable goods. What they took cannot be inventoried because almost nothing remains to identify it. The loss is larger than jewellery or valuable material. A coffin might have carried names, prayers, titles, images, and clues to dating. The body might have preserved age, disease, dental condition, trauma, embalming methods, and perhaps biological relationships. Containers might have retained residues. Small objects could have revealed affiliations or ritual choices. The chamber gives us a richly decorated setting around an evidentiary void. Its very intactness can therefore deceive. The colours are so vivid that the burial may appear undisturbed in photographs. But visual preservation is not the same as archaeological completeness. The walls remained because they were difficult to remove. The burial assemblage vanished because it was portable. This imbalance shaped what modern investigators could recover. They found a room that looked alive and a life that remained largely inaccessible. A later massive construction above the area added another layer to the paradox. Builders who had no intention of preserving Tetinebefou's memory covered the location with substantial masonry. That weight obscured the chamber and protected it from later stone extraction. Elsewhere at Saqqara, accessible blocks were quarried, reliefs were damaged, and exposed structures gradually disappeared. Here, later building sealed an earlier burial beneath it. Destruction in one phase became protection in another. The tomb survived not because every generation respected it, but because historical accidents made it inconvenient to reach. Inside, the decoration was integrated into the chamber rather than added as portable luxury. The signs were incised directly into limestone and painted with care. Some hieroglyphs associated with the owner's name are remarkably small, only a few millimeters high, showing that the craftsman worked at a level of precision easily missed in broad photographs. Around the niche intended for canopic equipment, traces of gilding added another controlled flash of prestige. No canopic jars securely belonging to Tetinebefou remain there now. The gold survives only as a trace around an absence. After documentation and conservation, the excavators closed the chamber again. This may seem anticlimactic beside the drama of discovery, but exposure can become a new form of danger. Light, air, temperature change, dust, and repeated entry threaten ancient surfaces that survived precisely because they were sealed. Archaeology is not simply the act of opening. It also involves deciding when to stop, how to stabilize, and whether protection requires reburial or restricted access. The tomb's true scale therefore sharpens rather than diminishes its importance. Tetinebefou did not need an enormous surviving mastaba to leave behind an exceptional record. A small underground room was enough to preserve his name, his titles, and the visual language of elite burial. But the room also teaches caution. Its missing superstructure cannot be invented. Its vanished contents cannot be replaced with convenient fantasies, and its funerary imagery cannot be read as a direct picture of medical work. To discover the man, the investigation must turn from the chamber's shape to the inscriptions fixed upon it, beginning with the false door through which Tetinebefou expected his identity to pass. The name emerges not from a body, an intact coffin, or a sealed archive, but from the architecture of remembrance. On the western wall of the chamber, the false door gathers Tetinebefou's identity into a carefully ordered surface of stone, colour, titles, and ritual expectation. To a modern visitor, the form can be deceptive. It resembles a doorway framed by jambs and topped by a lintel, yet it was never meant to open into a hidden corridor. Its purpose was symbolic. It marked the point through which the presence of the deceased could receive offerings and participate in the continuing relationship between the living and the dead. In ancient Egyptian tombs, the false door was a device for sustaining connection. The dead were not imagined as simply absent. They required food, drink, speech, names, and ritual attention. Offerings placed before the door were transformed through ceremony into provisions for the deceased, while the carved image and written identity of the tomb owner made clear who was entitled to receive them. Tetinebefou's false door did not conceal a room, it created a meeting point. That distinction matters because sensational accounts often turn every unusual feature into a secret passage. Here, the archaeology supports something more revealing and restrained. The door is not evidence of a hidden medical archive or a second untouched burial chamber. It is part of the standard language of elite funerary ritual, adapted to preserve an unusual professional identity. The texts around it record the owner's name and offices. A limestone lintel in the shaft repeats that information, and additional inscriptions within the chamber reinforce it. Tetinebefou is recovered through repetition, his identity made durable by being written into more than one architectural surface. The reading of the name belongs to the excavators and specialists who studied the inscriptions. They render it as Tetinebefou, while many English language reports simplify the spelling to Tetinebefou. The difference does not imply two people. It reflects attempts to represent sounds from a language written through a system that did not record vowels in the way modern English does. The important point is that the name is securely tied to the tomb's inscriptions, not attached later to an anonymous burial. The signs themselves reward close attention. Some are extremely small, only a few millimeters high, yet they were incised with precision before being painted. Their scale suggests a controlled decorative program rather than hurried labeling. The craftsman had to fit names, titles, offering formulas, and images into a compact chamber while preserving legibility and hierarchy. What appears at first as ornament is also a legal and religious statement. This space belongs to this man, and these offerings are directed to him. The false door helps explain why so much can survive when the body does not. A coffin could be removed. Grave goods could be stolen. A mummy could be carried away or destroyed. Carved wall surfaces were harder to extract, especially in a cramped underground room, later buried beneath additional construction. The architecture became an involuntary archive. Robbers stripped away the portable remains of Tetinebefou's life, but they left the part of his identity fixed to the chamber. His name survived because it was inconvenient to steal across more than 4,000 years. Yet even a named tomb does not provide a complete biography. The inscriptions tell us how Tetinebefou wished to be recognized, not how every part of his career unfolded. Titles in ancient Egypt could describe office, rank, ritual function, honor, or affiliation. Some reflected practical duties. Others may have accumulated over a lifetime or carried ceremonial significance. Scholars still debate how literally certain titles should be translated and what responsibilities they involved from day to day. The false door offers a controlled self-portrait, but it is the self-portrait of official status. This is where the tomb's central tension becomes sharper. Tetinebefou's name is present, but his voice is not. There is no autobiography comparable to the long career inscriptions of some officials. He does not describe a difficult diagnosis, a royal summons, an expedition for rare plants, or a successful treatment. The walls state who he was in institutional terms while remaining silent about the events that gave those terms meaning. What survives suggests prestige, but not personality. The offering scenes around the false door deepen that formal atmosphere. Food, vessels, and ritual provisions appear because the deceased required eternal sustenance. They are not straightforward illustrations of a physician at work. A painted jar cannot be assumed to contain medicine merely because the tomb owner held a medical title. A table of offerings is not a dispensary. The temptation to reinterpret every container as a pharmaceutical object must be resisted, because the same images appear in tombs belonging to people with different professions. Their primary function is funerary. Even so, the placement of Tetinebefou's titles within this program is extraordinary. They transform a familiar ritual structure into evidence for an uncommon career. The false door does more than preserve a personal name. It anchors 4 fields of authority around one individual high medical office in the royal palace: leadership among dentists, responsibility connected with medicinal plants, and service as a ritual specialist of the goddess Serket. These titles do not prove every activity later writers would like to assign to him, but their combination is rare enough to change how the chamber is read. The door also depended on the living. A name carved in stone could endure, but its ritual power was strengthened when spoken. Family members, priests, and visitors would have approached the offering place, recited formulas, presented bread and beer, and renewed the relationship between memory and survival. Over time, Those voices ceased, the surface structure decayed, the burial was robbed, the chamber disappeared beneath later building. For millennia, the false door faced silence. When archaeologists entered in December 2024, they did not restore the original cult, but they did something the monument had been designed to make possible. They read the name again. Tetinebefou crossed the threshold not as a spirit emerging from stone, but as a historical person reintroduced through writing. The door remained physically closed because it had never been a passage of masonry. Its true opening occurred in interpretation. Still, the name alone cannot identify the king he served or the patients he treated. It cannot tell us whether he spent most of his days examining illness, supervising specialists, managing stores, conducting ritual protection, or combining those functions. The false door returns the owner of the tomb, but only in the form he chose for eternity. To understand the world behind those titles, the investigation must next place him within the royal court of the late Old Kingdom, where his rank is visible but the pharaoh at the centre of his career remains unnamed. The royal palace enters the story through a title, not through the name of a king. Tetinebefou is identified as a senior physician of the royal household, a rank that places him close to the centre of power. Yet the inscriptions do not say which pharaoh employed him. This absence is easy to overlook because the tomb lies near the pyramid complex of Pepi the Fun, and because parts of its decoration resemble work associated with the reign of Pepi II. Those clues establish a broad setting, but they do not produce a secure royal name. The safest conclusion is narrower Tetinebefou served under an unidentified successor of Pepi I, probably during the later 6th dynasty. That distinction may seem cautious to the point of frustration, but chronology at Saqqara is often built from fragments. A king's name written directly in the tomb would provide a strong anchor. Without one, archaeologists compare artistic style, hieroglyphic forms, architectural relationships, neighbouring burials, titles, and patterns of cemetery development. Each can narrow the possibilities, yet none alone can eliminate every alternative. Stylistic resemblance is especially useful and especially dangerous. Craftsmen worked across reigns, traditions persisted, and later decorators could imitate earlier conventions. A tomb may look close to the age of Pepi II without belonging securely to his court. Pepi I nevertheless remains essential to the landscape around Tetinebefou. His pyramid complex helped organize the cemetery in which high officials and specialists sought burial. The king's monument was not merely a colossal grave, it supported a temple, priesthood, estates, supplies, and recurring ritual activity intended to maintain royal memory after death. Officials buried nearby placed themselves within that continuing system. Their tombs formed a map of allegiance and social rank around the pyramid. Tetinebefou's position in this elite zone suggests that his career had brought him considerable standing, even though the exact route to that standing is lost. A palace physician occupied a world where health could carry political consequences. The body of a ruler was not simply private. Royal continuity, court ceremony, administration, and religious order were concentrated around it. An illness affecting the king could unsettle schedules, access, succession, and the confidence of those whose authority depended on the palace. The physicians serving there therefore operated in an environment of privilege and pressure. They may have cared for the ruler, members of the royal family, senior officials, or others admitted to the household. But no surviving record identifies Tetinebefou's patients. His title makes royal treatment plausible. It does not prove that he was the personal doctor of Pepi II or of any named pharaoh. The palace itself should not be imagined as a single quiet building resembling a later hospital attached to a throne room. It was an institution made of residences, offices, storerooms, workshops, courtyards, ceremonial spaces, kitchens, archives, and personnel. Scribes tracked resources, servants moved food, linen, oils, and equipment, priests, guards, administrators, artisans, and specialists worked within overlapping chains of authority. A high-ranking physician belonged to that machinery. His work may have included direct examination, supervision of other healers, control of supplies, or responsibility for particular categories of treatment. The titles preserved in his tomb suggest a man whose authority extended beyond one narrow practice. This broader role matters when interpreting the word physician. Modern medicine divides expertise into formal specialties supported by standardized training, written credentials, laboratories, and institutions. Ancient Egyptian titles reveal differentiation, but not an identical professional system. A person could hold several offices that combined practical skill, ritual knowledge, management, and status. Tetinebefou's career appears to have crossed precisely those boundaries. He was not only associated with palace medicine, but also with dentists, medicinal plants, and the cultic protection of Serket. Whether he personally performed every task implied by those titles remains unknown. Some may describe leadership over other practitioners rather than constant hands-on treatment. The late Old Kingdom provided both opportunity and uncertainty for such officials. The Sixth Dynasty inherited centuries of increasingly elaborate royal administration, monumental building, and elite tomb culture. Under Tetinebefou and his successors, provincial leaders and court officials accumulated influence, while royal institutions continued to project permanence through stone, ritual, and bureaucracy. Yet the period would eventually lead toward the political fragmentation traditionally associated with the end of the Old Kingdom. The timing and causes of that transition remain debated. Climatic stress, changes in royal authority, succession problems, local power, economic pressures, and institutional strain have all been considered, but no single explanation fully accounts for the transformation. Tetinebefou's tomb does not announce that collapse. Its careful decoration instead conveys confidence in hierarchy and continuity. The ceiling imitating granite, the finely painted signs, and the gilded details belong to a world still investing heavily in eternal order. Even so, the uncertainty surrounding his date places him near a historical horizon later generations would interpret as a turning point. He may have lived while the system still appeared durable, before the structures supporting royal and funerary institutions weakened or changed. The chamber therefore captures not the drama of collapse, but the elite expectation that rank, offerings, and written identity would continue indefinitely. Its quiet confidence is itself a valuable historical clue. Pepi II often enters this discussion because his reign is associated with the later Sixth Dynasty, and because stylistic parallels connect Tetinebefou's decoration to tombs from that period. Traditional chronologies once credited Pepi II with an exceptionally long reign, though exact dates and lengths continue to be reassessed. New radiocarbon work and renewed study of archaeological context have complicated older certainties about the final centuries of the Old Kingdom. That changing scholarship reinforces the need for restraint. A resemblance to Pepi II's period is evidence. It is not a signed employment record. The unnamed king at the centre of Tetinebefou's career thus becomes part of the mystery, rather than a gap to be filled by confidence. Perhaps the physician served one ruler for many years, Perhaps his offices spanned more than one reign, as careers sometimes did. Perhaps he rose through the palace hierarchy under a successor whose monuments and records are less complete. The surviving inscriptions do not decide among these possibilities. What they do establish is proximity to power. Tetinebefou belonged to the royal institution closely enough for that connection to define his identity after death. He chose to preserve palace service among the distinctions that would accompany his name eternally. Yet the king remains absent, just as the patients remain absent. The tomb gives us a court physician without a documented consultation, a royal office without a royal face, and a career whose highest audience has disappeared from the record. To move closer to the man himself, the 4 titles must now be examined together, not as decorative honours, but as the surviving architecture of an extraordinary professional life. 4 titles survive where almost everything else has disappeared, and together they form the closest thing Tetinebefou possesses to a biography. Each is brief. None records a single patient, remedy, or successful treatment. Yet their combination reveals a career that crossed the boundaries modern readers often assume must have been separate. He was a senior physician of the royal palace, the head of dentists, a director connected with medicinal plants, and a priest conjurer of the goddess Serket. In one individual, court medicine, dental care, botanical knowledge, administration, ritual protection, and venom treatment appear to converge. The first title places him among the highest medical authorities of the palace. Its exact nuance depends on how the ancient rank is translated, but it clearly signals exceptional standing. Tetinebefou was not merely one healer among many operating far from the court. He belonged near the institution of kingship and may have supervised other practitioners. The title makes it reasonable to imagine responsibility for members of the royal household, perhaps including the ruler. But the record does not identify a specific king or patient. Even the attractive phrase physician to the pharaoh must be handled carefully. It describes proximity and office, not a documented consultation. The second title names him as chief of dentists. This sounds immediately familiar, yet the modern word can mislead. Ancient Egyptian specialist titles do not prove that their holders practiced dentistry as it exists today, with regular extraction, drilling, prosthetics, and surgical intervention. Egyptian teeth often suffered badly. Stone particles and grit entered flour during grinding, wearing enamel down over years. Abscesses, infection, exposed pulp, gum disease, and tooth loss appear frequently in preserved remains. A senior dental specialist therefore worked in a society where oral pain was common, but what he could do about it remains uncertain. He may have diagnosed conditions, prescribed preparations, reduced symptoms, supervised care, or occasionally attempted direct procedures. The surviving archaeological evidence for operative dentistry is sparse, and the title alone cannot fill that gap. The third office is rarer still. Tetinebefou was associated with the direction or management of medicinal plants. This is among the most intriguing details in the chamber, because it implies organized knowledge rather than casual household use. Plants had to be identified, gathered, acquired, stored, measured, prepared, and distributed. Some came from the Nile Valley, others may have arrived through trade. Leaves, resins, oils, seeds, roots, fruits, fibers, and gums could enter remedies, perfumes, embalming substances, foods, and ritual preparations. Yet the tomb provides no list of species and no formula bearing his name. There is no confirmed medical garden, storeroom, pharmacy, or residue that can securely be linked to his office. The title suggests an institutional role, but the structure of that institution remains invisible. His fourth title moves most clearly into a realm modern language calls magic. Tetinebefou served as a priest and ritual practitioner of Serket, a goddess associated with protection from venomous animals, especially scorpions and snakes. The usual translation can produce terms such as conjurer, magician, or charmer. None should be imagined as stage performance or fantasy sorcery. In ancient Egyptian thought, spoken formulas, divine names, amulets, gestures, substances, and practical treatment could act together. A person facing a dangerous bite did not necessarily choose between medicine as religion. Both belong to the same effort to identify the threat, contain its effects, and restore order to the body. Taken separately, each title raises questions. Taken together, they suggest a senior specialist whose authority may have been managerial as well as practical. Tetinebefou could have examined patients himself while also directing subordinates, controlling access to ingredients, and performing rituals in cases associated with venom or divine danger. But this remains inference. Titles can describe rank, honor, priestly membership, or responsibility without revealing how often a person performed each task. A chief may administer more than practice. A ritual office may be held alongside other duties. The walls preserve the architecture of authority, not the daily schedule behind it. There is also no reason to assume that all 4 offices were awarded at once. Tetinebefou may have accumulated them over a long career. He could have begun with medical training, advanced within the palace, acquired specialized responsibilities, and eventually reached a status worthy of elaborate commemoration. Or the titles may reflect overlapping institutions in which healing was never divided into the modern categories of doctor, dentist, pharmacist, botanist, and priest. The evidence remains incomplete, and no surviving text narrates his advancement. Even so, the combination matters. It shows that elite healing in the late Old Kingdom could be organized through distinct areas of expertise while remaining intellectually unified. Teeth belong to the body. Plants supplied substances. Ritual addressed dangerous forces, and palace rank determined access and authority. Tetinebefou's career cannot be reduced to one simple profession, because the culture that named his offices did not arrange knowledge according to modern boundaries. The hierarchy behind these offices may also have controlled who could approach the court and whose knowledge received official recognition. Skill alone did not create rank. Literacy, patronage, ritual, eligibility, administrative trust, and years of service may all have shaped advancement. Tetinebefou's titles therefore preserve not only medical expertise, but successful movement through institutions whose internal rules are now almost entirely lost. The titles also reveal how he wanted eternity to remember him. He did not preserve a list of personal virtues, family stories, or dramatic cures. He preserved institutional identity. In a hierarchical society, office located a person within the order of the world. To state that he led physicians or dentists was to state that he commanded recognized knowledge and people. To associate him with medicinal plants was to connect him with valued resources. To name Serket was to place him under divine protection and within a tradition dealing with some of the most frightening emergencies of Egyptian life. But the silence beneath those claims is profound. No subordinate is named. No patient offers thanks. No royal decree describes an appointment. No prescription carries his seal. We do not know whether his greatest skill lay in diagnosis, organization, ritual performance, or political confidence at court. What survives in the record suggests that all these abilities may have mattered, yet no single explanation fully accounts for the career implied by the walls. The 4 titles, therefore, do not solve Tetinebefou's mystery. They define it. They show a man standing at the intersection of medicine and ritual, practical care and symbolic protection, specialized knowledge and palace hierarchy. They make his life more visible while making its missing details harder to ignore. To understand why a royal physician could also be called a ritual specialist without contradiction, the modern division between medicine and magic must be left behind, and the Egyptian logic of healing entered on its own terms. The word magician becomes dangerous the moment it is carried into the ancient world without explanation. To a modern audience, it suggests illusion, superstition, or a person claiming powers beyond nature. Tetinebefou's title means something different. He was a ritual specialist associated with Serket, a goddess invoked against venom and other threats, and his role belonged to a culture in which healing, prayer, protective speech, practical observation, and prepared substances were not arranged into separate intellectual boxes. The distinction between medicine and magic would have made little sense inside the system that produced his career. An Egyptian healer could examine a wound, apply a dressing, prescribe a plant preparation, speak a formula, invoke a deity, and place a protective object near the patient without believing that these actions contradicted one another. Each addressed a different dimension of the same crisis. A cut could bleed because tissue had been damaged, but illness could also be understood through forces of disorder, divine anger, hostile agents, or dangerous beings. The body was physical, social, and sacred. Treatment therefore aimed not only to reduce pain or stop bleeding, but also to restore balance around the afflicted person. This is why the label physician-magician can be useful and misleading at the same time. It captures the overlap of roles visible in Tetinebefou's titles, but it risks turning him into a theatrical figure. Nothing in the tomb proves that he claimed supernatural feats. No spellbook bears his name. No scene shows him standing over a patient with a wand or commanding invisible forces. What survives is an office connected with Serket and a set of medical titles embedded in the institutions of the royal court. The evidence supports ritual expertise. It does not support fantasy. Later Egyptian healing texts help reveal how such expertise could function, although they must be used carefully because the surviving manuscripts are much younger than Tetinebefou. In those texts, practical instructions and spoken formulas often appear side by side. A remedy may name ingredients and methods of preparation, then include words intended to activate protection or identify the harmful force. The healer's authority depends on knowledge of substances, symptoms, divine names, and correct performance. The categories modern historians call empirical and magical are woven together in the same procedure. That does not mean every treatment was effective. Some ingredients may have soothed, cleaned, reduced inflammation, or created protective barriers. Others may have had little physiological value. Ritual speech could calm a frightened patient, reinforce confidence in the healer, and organize the response of family or attendants. But it could not reverse every injury or neutralize every toxin. Ancient medicine operated under limits, infection, internal disease, and envenomation could progress beyond the reach of available care. Yet the presence of ineffective elements does not erase observation. Egyptian practitioners could distinguish types of wounds, recognize signs of danger, and describe when a case appeared treatable or hopeless. The social effect of ritual should also not be underestimated. A patient suffering sudden pain, swelling, weakness, or fear entered a world of uncertainty. The healer's words gave the event a structure. Naming a deity or hostile force made the crisis intelligible. Repeating a formula established sequence and control. Applying a substance while speaking transformed treatment into a public act of order. Even when the biological mechanism was unknown, the ritual could shape behavior, attention, and trust. Modern medicine still recognizes that expectation, reassurance, and the relationship between practitioner and patient influence the experience of illness, though that does not validate claims of supernatural causation. For a palace specialist, performance carried additional weight. Tetinebefou's patients may have included people whose bodies had political significance. A ruler, royal relative, or senior official could not be treated as an anonymous sufferer. Ceremony, privacy, hierarchy, and access would have shaped the encounter. The physician had to demonstrate competence in a setting where failure might damage more than reputation. Ritual language may have protected the patient, but it also affirmed the healer's command of recognized traditions. To know the proper words was a professional skill, not an optional ornament. The title linked to Serket is especially revealing because venomous bites and stings create precisely the kind of emergency in which medicine and ritual would converge. Symptoms can appear suddenly, change rapidly, and inspire terror. The responsible specialist needed to identify danger, judge the likely outcome, apply available remedies, and manage fear. Invoking Serket placed the treatment within a divine framework associated with protection from venom. It did not prevent the practitioner from observing the wound or using material treatments. The same individual could work with both. Scholars still debate how formalized these healing professions were in the Old Kingdom and how knowledge passed from one practitioner to another. Training may have involved family lines, temple institutions, court service, apprenticeship, literacy, or combinations of these. The surviving evidence is too uneven to reconstruct a single system. Tetinebefou's rank suggests organized specialization, but the tomb does not reveal where he learned, who taught him, or whether he trained others. His titles imply a network while preserving none of its members. The language of magic can also obscure the seriousness of ritual office. Egyptian ritual practitioners were not marginal figures operating outside society. They could serve temples, courts, households, and state institutions. Their knowledge was embedded in texts, ceremonies, divine cults, and administrative roles. A title connected with Serket could therefore enhance Tetinebefou's prestige rather than undermine his identity as a physician. This same culture that valued remedies also valued correct speech and divine protection. This helps explain why his 4 titles were carved together without apology. The royal physician and the ritual specialist were not competing versions of the same man. They were complementary expressions of authority. Plants treated the body. Dental expertise addressed pain. Palace rank organized responsibility. Serket's protection confronted venom and disorder. The tomb presents these functions as parts of one coherent career. What remains unknown is how often Tetinebefou personally performed ritual beside a patient, how much of his work involved supervision, and whether his office was activated mainly during emergencies. No written procedure from his lifetime can be securely attached to him. Later papyri illuminate possibilities, but they cannot be turned into his handbook. The evidence remains incomplete, and every reconstruction must preserve that distance. Even with those limits, the title changes the way the chamber is understood. It shows that elite healing in the late Old Kingdom was not moving along a straight road from superstition towards science. It was a different system, one capable of careful observation while remaining deeply ritual. Tetinebefou belonged to that system at its highest levels. To approach one of its most urgent responsibilities, the story must follow Serket more closely into the world of snakes, scorpions, venom, fear, and the specialists expected to stand between a sudden sting and death. The danger represented by Serket was not abstract. Egypt was a land of cultivated fields, desert margins, mud brick houses, storage rooms, reed beds, river banks, and stone ruins, all environments in which venomous animals could appear without warning. Scorpions hid beneath debris and inside dark spaces. Snakes moved through fields, courtyards, marshes, and settlements. A bite or sting could begin with a brief encounter and develop into swelling pain, weakness, difficulty breathing, or death. In such moments, the ritual specialist of Serket was not an ornamental priest. He belonged to the response to one of the most frightening medical emergencies of ancient life. Serket's name is associated with protection, breath, and the control of venom. She appears in Egyptian religion as a guardian against dangerous creatures. Her image could be linked with the scorpion, though her protective reach extended beyond one animal. In funerary belief, she also guarded the dead, including the vessels that preserved internal organs. That role helps explain why traces of gilding around the canopic niche in Tetinebefou's chamber carried more than decorative value. The goddess connected to his ritual office also belonged to the protective world surrounding burial. Yet the title does not tell us precisely what he did when someone was bitten. He may have examined the wound, judged the danger, selected a preparation, spoken protective formulas, supervised assistance, or combined these actions. He may also have held authority over other Serket specialists rather than responding personally to every emergency. The evidence remains incomplete. No treatment manual from his tomb survives. No instrument can be identified as his, and no named patient records a recovery. His title establishes affiliation and expertise, not a complete procedure. Much later Egyptian texts provide a partial window into this tradition, the Brooklyn Medical Papyrus, preserved from a period more than a millennium after Tetinebefou, includes descriptions of snakes, the consequences of their bites, prognoses, and treatments. It reveals a culture attempting to distinguish dangerous species, observe symptoms, and decide whether a patient might survive. Some entries combine practical measures with ritual language, showing the same overlap between medicine and sacred protection visible in Tetinebefou's career, but the papyrus cannot be treated as his personal handbook. It belongs to a later stage of a long tradition, useful for a comparison but separated from him by immense time. The effort to identify snakes is significant. Without modern taxonomy, anti-venom, or laboratory analysis, healers still needed categories: colour, markings, habitat, behaviour, the appearance of the bite, and the progression of symptoms could all matter. Accurate identification might improve prognosis, but mistakes were inevitable. Different species can produce different effects, and the amount of venom delivered varies. Some bites are dry, injecting little or no venom, while others become rapidly fatal. Ancient practitioners did not understand these mechanisms in modern terms, yet repeated encounters could generate practical patterns of recognition. Scorpion stings posed a similar challenge. Many caused severe pain without death, while others can produce dangerous systemic effects. The victim's condition, the species involved, and the location of the sting influence the outcome. To those witnessing the event, however, uncertainty itself was terrifying. A healer associated with Serket offered a framework for action. The animal could be named, the wound inspected, the patient treated, and the danger addressed through both substance and speech. Even when no cure was possible, the response imposed order on panic. The role of spoken ritual becomes clearer in this setting. Venom acts invisibly once it enters the body. Symptoms may spread from a tiny puncture to the chest, limbs, or breath. A protective formula gave language to an unseen process. The practitioner could identify himself with a deity who had power over the creature, command the poison to stop, and restore the body symbolically to balance. These words were not separate from treatment in the patient's experience. They accompanied touching, binding, washing, drinking, inhaling, or applying substances, making the procedure a single therapeutic performance. Some ingredients used in later remedies may have soothed tissue or supported wound care, while others probably had little direct effect on venom. Without antivenom, successful outcomes often depended on the severity of exposure and the patient's own survival. This creates a difficult historical problem. A person might recover after receiving a ritual and remedy, reinforcing confidence in the treatment, even if the bite had delivered little venom. Another might die despite the same procedure. Ancient healers learned within that uncertainty, unable to separate every cause from coincidence. Tetinebefou's palace rank may have made his venom-related office especially important. Royal residences and temple estates were not isolated from the natural environment. Grain stores attracted rodents, and rodents attracted snakes. Gardens, courtyards, construction materials, and imported goods created hiding places. Servants, workers, guards, priests, and members of the household all faced exposure. A specialist trusted by the palace could coordinate treatment quickly and bring recognized ritual authority into a crisis near the king. His office may also have involved prevention, protective amulets, ritual objects, purified spaces, and formulas against snakes or scorpions could be used before an incident occurred. Specialists might identify dangerous animals, oversee their removal, or prepare substances kept for emergencies. None of these activities is directly documented for Tetinebefou, but they fit the broader responsibilities associated with Serket's cult. What survives suggests a role extending beyond bedside treatment into protection and institutional readiness. The goddess herself embodied an important Egyptian principle. The same force that threatened life could also be mastered and redirected. A scorpion's power became a symbol of protection. Venom could be imagined as something commanded by divine authority. Serket did not erase danger. She represented the possibility that danger could be contained. A practitioner serving her stood at that boundary, where fear became procedure and an unpredictable attack became a case to be classified, treated, and ritually controlled. This is why the title cannot be reduced to superstition, yet should not be romanticized as evidence of advanced toxicology. Tetinebefou lived without modern chemistry, controlled trials, or anti-venom production. His knowledge was built from observation, inherited tradition, ritual training, and court authority. Some practices may have helped, some may have reassured, and some may have failed. No single explanation fully accounts for how these elements work together. The chamber preserves only the title, but that title opens onto a world of sudden pain and urgent decisions. Somewhere beyond the walls were patients whose names are lost, animals that struck and vanished, and practitioners who responded with plants, bindings, words, and divine protection. Serket's presence shows that Tetinebefou's medicine included threats the body could not ignore and the imagination could not fully control. From venom, their path leads naturally to another part of his authority, the rare office connected with medicinal plants, where the substances applied to the body become as mysterious as the creatures that made them necessary. The substances used against venom lead directly to one of the rarest titles in Tetinebefou's tomb. He was associated with the direction or management of medicinal plants, an office so unusual that it invites more certainty than the evidence can support. The title does not reveal a garden, a storeroom, a workshop, or a collection of written recipes. It does not name a single herb. It does not identify the people he supervised or explain whether he selected ingredients, controlled their storage, approved their use, or managed a wider palace supply system. What survives is the outline of responsibility without the institution that once gave it shape. Even so, the office implies that plant knowledge could exist at an organized level within the royal world. Remedies did not begin at the bedside. Before anything could be ground, boiled, mixed, steeped, applied, inhaled, or swallowed, ingredients had to be found and recognized. Leaves, seeds, roots, fruits, resins, gums, oils, bark, fibers, and flowers entered many areas of Egyptian life. Some were foods, some perfumes, some ritual substances, some embalming materials, and some components of treatments. A single ingredient could belong to more than one category depending on preparation and context. The modern desire to separate medicine from cuisine, cosmetics, religion, and household practice often fits the evidence poorly. The Nile Valley offered a rich but uneven botanical environment. Cultivated fields produced familiar crops, while riverbanks, marshes, gardens, desert margins, and imported trade goods expanded the available range. Others may have reached palace stores through long-distance exchange. Frankincense, myrrh, aromatic woods, oils, and resins carried economic as well as ritual value. Yet Tetinebefou's tomb does not show which of these materials passed through his hands. No container found there has been securely identified as his medicine. The painted vessels on the walls belong primarily to funerary provision, and cannot be converted into a pharmacy simply because the tomb owner held a botanical title. This is where the loss caused by ancient robbery becomes especially severe. Portable jars, boxes, labels, tools, and organic materials would have offered the most direct evidence for his practical work. But such items are absent. Plant matter rarely survives unless conditions are favourable, and even when residues remain, identifying their original use can be difficult. A substance might have served as food, perfume, incense, embalming material, or treatment. Without context, chemical traces can suggest ingredients while leaving purpose uncertain. In Tetinebefou's case, there is not even a confirmed assemblage to test. The title Director of Medicinal Plants may indicate expertise, administration, or both. A senior official could have overseen procurement and personnel rather than personally gathering herbs. He may have supervised specialists who prepared compounds for the palace. He may have controlled stores from which physicians drew ingredients, inspected quality, authorized distribution, or maintained knowledge of which materials suited particular complaints. The tomb preserves rank, not an organizational chart. Later Egyptian medical papyri demonstrate that plant and mineral substances were used in complex preparations, but they cannot be projected backward as Tetinebefou's personal practice. The surviving Ebers papyrus, for example, dates from the 2nd millennium BCE, many centuries after his lifetime. It contains numerous remedies and illustrates a written tradition in which ingredients, quantities, preparation methods, and spoken formulas could appear together. It helps historians understand Egyptian pharmacological thinking, but it is not evidence that Tetinebefou owned the same text, used the same recipes, or worked within an identical system. Medical knowledge changes, accumulates, disappears, and is reorganized. A remedy copied in a later manuscript may preserve older traditions, but tracing any individual formula back to the late Old Kingdom is rarely possible. Scholars still debate how much continuity existed between early practitioners and the better documented healing texts of later periods. No single explanation fully accounts for the relationship between Tetinebefou's title and the papyri that survive from much later centuries. Plants themselves added another layer of uncertainty. Identification in ancient texts can be difficult because names may be ambiguous, regional, symbolic, or no longer securely connected to a modern species. A word translated as a familiar herb may refer to a different plant, a preparation, or a category of substances. Even when the species is known, the medical effect depends on dose, part used, freshness, preparation, and route of administration. Some plants contain compounds with real physiological action. Others may soothe through texture, scent, or warmth. Some could be dangerous if misidentified or taken in excess. Ancient healers learned without modern pharmacology, but not without experience. Repeated use could reveal that certain preparations eased pain, protected a wound, stimulated digestion, induced sleep, or reduced visible symptoms. Honey, oils, fats, fibers, and plant pastes could create barriers or change the condition of the skin. Aromatic substances could alter breathing or perception. Yet successful experience did not necessarily reveal mechanism. A remedy might work for reasons the practitioner could not explain, while another might remain in use because ritual authority or tradition protected it from doubt. Within the palace, consistency would have mattered. Rare ingredients were valuable and poor storage could ruin them. Heat, insects, moisture, contamination, and substitution threatened supplies. A person directing medicinal plants may therefore have needed administrative discipline as much as botanical recognition. Measuring, labeling, securing, and distributing materials were forms of knowledge. The title may describe a point where practical healing met bureaucracy, with Tetinebefou standing between the natural world and the controlled resources of the court. His plant-related office may also have overlapped with ritual preparation. Substances used in medicine could be burned, worn, washed over the body, or offered to deities. An ingredient's effectiveness might be understood through both physical qualities and sacred associations. This does not make the material unreal. It means its meaning extended beyond chemistry. Tetinebefou may have needed to know not only what a substance did, but when, how, and under whose protection it should be used. The absence of a medical garden is therefore important. Nothing in the discovery proves that he managed a vast cultivated plot beside the palace. Nothing identifies a herbarium or pharmacy in the modern sense. The title is powerful precisely because it points toward an institution that archaeology has not recovered. It offers a glimpse of organized botanical responsibility, then withdraws every practical detail. Tetinebefou remains surrounded by painted offerings, while the plants that may have defined part of his career have vanished. Their names are absent, their scents gone, their containers stolen, and their effects impossible to test. Only the office remains, carved into stone. From that silence, another title demands the same caution. As head of dentists, Tetinebefou appears to lead a recognized specialty, yet the painful condition of his ancient Egyptian teeth and the scarcity of direct interventions raise a difficult question. What could such a chief actually do when a patient opened his mouth? Pain leaves clearer marks in ancient bodies than most treatments do. Egyptian teeth survive in large numbers, and many tell the same harsh story: enamel ground down, chewing surfaces flattened, dentine exposed, roots infected, jaws scarred by abscesses. Bread was a staple, but flour produced with stone tools could contain fine mineral grit. Over years, every meal became an instrument of abrasion. Even wealthy people could suffer severe dental wear, because status did not remove particles from food. Tetinebefou's title as chief of dentists therefore placed him over a field of suffering that was common, visible, and often relentless. The title is striking because it proves that dental care was recognized as a specialized domain. It does not reveal what that specialty looked like in practice. A modern dentist works with instruments, anesthesia, controlled extraction, restoration, imaging, sterilization, and a detailed understanding of infection. None of that structure can be assumed for the Old Kingdom. Tetinebefou may have examined mouths, prepared substances, supervised practitioners, and occasionally attempted direct dental intervention. But the evidence for routine operative dentistry in ancient Egypt remains extremely limited. Recent scholarship has made this distinction even more important. A title translated as dentist once encouraged images of organized dental surgery far earlier than the archaeological record could support. Yet skeletal remains rarely show convincing signs of systematic drilling, filling, or extraction carried out as treatment. Teeth were certainly lost during life, but natural disease can produce that result. Holes may come from decay, wear, burial damage, or later handling. A missing tooth is not automatically evidence of a successful procedure. Egyptian medical texts include remedies for mouth and tooth complaints, but written prescriptions are not proof of surgery. A practitioner might treat pain with rinses, poultices, plant mixtures, oils, resins, or substances applied around the gums. Such care could reduce discomfort without removing the underlying cause. A dental specialist could therefore hold a respected title, even if most treatment was medicinal, palliative, diagnostic, or administrative rather than operative. For a patient with a throbbing tooth, swelling, foul taste, or difficulty eating, recognition and relief still mattered. A healer who understood which complaints were likely to worsen, which preparations soothed the mouth, and when a condition had become dangerous, possessed valuable knowledge. Pain management, however incomplete, was a form of care. So was prognosis. Knowing that an infection might spread or that a tooth was beyond saving could shape decisions even when effective intervention was limited. The palace setting raises the stakes. Royal diets may also have created distinctive dental problems. Prestige protected access to treatment, not immunity from disease. A senior dental official might have examined high-status patients whose discomfort disrupted speech, eating, ritual performance, or public appearance. He may also have overseen subordinate practitioners, ingredients, and records. Yet no appointment document survives to show how his office functioned, and the tomb names no patient. There is another reason to avoid imagining a surgical kit beside Tetinebefou's body. None was found. The burial had been robbed in antiquity, so objects may once have existed and disappeared, but absence cannot be converted into discovery. No confirmed dental forceps, drill, probe, or extraction instrument from his tomb can be placed in his hands. The painted vessels on the walls are funerary images, not labelled mouth medicines. The chamber provides titles, not equipment. Even elsewhere in Egypt, supposed dental instruments are difficult to identify. Metal tools can serve many purposes, and form alone rarely proves use. Model tools placed in tombs can symbolize status rather than document surgery, where analysis, residue, context, and comparison are necessary, and certainty may remain elusive. Scholars still debate whether people bearing dental titles were operative specialists or experts in preparing and administering treatments. Ancient jaws show how little could be reversed once disease advanced. Heavy wear opened channels toward the pulp. Infection could spread through the root and into surrounding bone, creating abscesses visible to modern researchers as lesions. A patient might experience repeated pain, swelling, drainage, and temporary relief. Without antibiotics, infection could remain chronic or become dangerous. Extraction might sometimes have offered relief, but removing a deeply rooted tooth without reliable anesthesia or infection control carried risk. This does not mean Egyptians never extracted teeth. People in many ancient societies undoubtedly removed damaged teeth under some circumstances. A rare intervention is not the same as a standardized profession of dental surgery. Tetinebefou's title establishes hierarchy within a recognized field. It does not tell us how many patients underwent procedures or which techniques were accepted. His authority may have rested partly on diagnosis and classification. The mouth presents visible signs: swelling, discoloration, broken crowns, bleeding gums, looseness, ulcers, odour, and discharge. A practitioner could compare cases and develop practical categories without understanding bacteria or inflammatory pathways. Repeated observation may have taught that some complaints were localized, while others accompanied broader illness. Later medical texts show careful descriptions, but those manuscripts are much younger and cannot be treated as Tetinebefou's own notes. The relationship between dentistry and his other titles may be more revealing than dentistry alone. Medicinal plants could supply preparations for oral pain. Palace authority could organize who received care. Ritual knowledge could address suffering that material treatments failed to resolve. Tetinebefou's offices may therefore represent not 4 isolated careers, but an integrated system of expertise. There is also a social dimension to the title chief. It implies other people beneath him, or at least a recognized category over which leadership could be claimed. The tomb does not preserve their names. They may have been practitioners attached to the palace, assistants responsible for ingredients, or specialists serving different members of the household. Tetinebefou's rank may have depended as much on supervision and trust as on his own manual skill. A chief is not defined only by what his hands do, but by what he is authorized to direct. The most honest reconstruction remains suspended between 2 errors. One dismisses the title because ancient practitioners lacked modern dentistry. The other turns it into proof of sophisticated dental surgery unsupported by evidence. Tetinebefou was genuinely a high-ranking dental specialist, but the nature of that specialization remains uncertain. He worked in a society burdened by severe oral disease, and his office was important enough to be carved into his tomb. Beyond that, the walls fall silent. What survives suggests that a patient opening his mouth before Tetinebefou entered a recognized field of care, not random improvisation. The physician could observe, classify, prescribe, and perhaps intervene, but the exact sequence is lost. To imagine the encounter more responsibly, the story must widen beyond teeth and follow the logic preserved in later Egyptian medical traditions: examination, diagnosis, prognosis, treatment, and the difficult moment when a healer had to admit that a condition could not be cured. A consultation in Tetinebefou's world cannot be reconstructed from his tomb, because no case history, instrument, prescription, or patient record survives there. Yet later Egyptian medical texts preserve a recognizable sequence of examination, judgment, treatment, and prognosis that helps us imagine the intellectual habits of healers without pretending those manuscripts belong to him. The result is not a scene we can claim happened exactly as described, but a cautious model of how an elite practitioner might have approached illness first by looking, touching, listening, and asking what could be known from the body before deciding what could be done. The patient would arrive carrying symptoms rather than a diagnosis. Pain might be localized, spreading, throbbing, burning, or dull. Swelling could appear suddenly or grow over days. A wound might be clean, contaminated, bleeding, closed, or already producing heat and discharge. Breathing could be labored, speech might be altered, the mouth might show broken teeth, inflamed gums, or an abscess pressing into the jaw. The healer's first task was to transform these impressions into an ordered case. Later texts such as the Edwin Smith Papyrus show practitioners describing injuries with remarkable structure. They inspect, palpate, test movement, compare sides of the body, note bleeding, and consider whether a patient can respond. The surviving copy dates many centuries after Tetinebefou, so it cannot be treated as his manual. Still, it demonstrates that Egyptian healing traditions could value systematic observation. The body was not only a site for ritual intervention, it was also something to be read. Touch mattered because the hands could reveal heat, hardness, instability, tenderness, and swelling. The physician might press around an injury, feel along a jaw, examine the gums, or assess whether a limb moved normally. Smell, color, and texture could also carry information. A foul odor suggested decay or infection, even if its biological cause remained unknown. Discharge, discoloration, or persistent bleeding marked danger. Repeated experience taught patterns, though the explanations attached to those patterns were not modern. After examination came judgment. Egyptian medical texts sometimes classify cases through formulas roughly corresponding to an ailment that can be treated, one that must be fought with, or one for which nothing should be done. These categories reveal professional restraint as well as confidence. A healer did not claim universal success. Some injuries were recognized as beyond available care. That admission is one of the most important signs of practical reasoning in the surviving tradition. For Tetinebefou, prognosis may have carried unusual weight. In the royal household, a judgment about whether someone would recover could influence ritual planning, administration, access, and political expectation. A false assurance might damage trust. An overly cautious verdict might also have consequences. The chief physician therefore needed not only knowledge, but composure. He had to speak with authority while recognizing uncertainty. Treatment could then combine material and spoken actions. A wound might be cleaned, closed, bandaged, or covered with a preparation. A painful mouth might receive a rinse, paste, oil, or plant-based compound. Swelling might be treated with applications intended to cool, dry, soften, or draw out harmful matter. A venomous bite could call for binding, substances, observation, and ritual speech under Serket's protection. The exact methods available to Tetinebefou remain unknown, but his 4 titles suggest access to a broad range of responses. The order of these actions may have mattered as much as their ingredients. Measuring, grinding, heating, mixing, applying, and reciting transformed raw materials into authorized treatment. Precision could strengthen confidence even where physiological effect was limited. A remedy prepared incorrectly might be considered ineffective not only because the mixture changed, but because the ritual sequence had failed. This overlap between practical procedure and sacred performance complicates modern evaluation. Some treatments may have had direct benefits. Cleaning and covering wounds can reduce contamination. Honey has properties that may inhibit some microbes. Though ancient practitioners did not understand microbiology, oils and fats can protect skin. Fibers can support dressings. Other remedies may have been neutral, harmful, or as effective only as comfort. Spoken formulas could not repair a fracture or neutralize severe venom, but they could calm the patient, coordinate attendance, and reinforce the legitimacy of the healer. The physician also worked through a social environment. Family members, servants, priests, and assistants may have observed or participated. In a palace setting, access would be controlled. Ingredients had to be brought, water prepared, linens supplied, and instructions followed. A senior figure such as Tetinebefou may have delegated many steps while retaining responsibility for the diagnosis and final decision. His rank implies a system around him even though the names of its members are lost. One lesser-known feature of Egyptian medical reasoning is that prognosis sometimes depended on whether the body still behaved in expected ways. Movement, sensation, speech, temperature, and response to touch could all guide judgment. A patient who remained alert and stable presented a different case from one who could not swallow, breathe, or move. These observations do not amount to modern neurology or internal medicine, but they show attention to function. Diagnosis also required naming without certainty. Ancient descriptions could group together conditions that modern medicine separates, because visible symptoms were often the only guide. 2 patients with swelling might have entirely different diseases, while one internal disorder could produce several outward signs. The healer's categories were therefore practical maps rather than complete explanations, useful for action even when the underlying cause remained hidden. The limits of treatment were always nearby. Infection could spread. Internal bleeding could remain invisible. Severe dental abscesses could erode bone. Snake venom could progress faster than any remedy. Cancer, organ disease, and chronic conditions would often escape explanation. The healer might reduce symptoms without changing the outcome. What survives in later texts suggests that Egyptian practitioners sometimes recognized this boundary, even if ritual language continued around it. Tetinebefou's chamber gives no direct scene of such a consultation. The painted vessels are not labeled remedies. The offering tables are not treatment stations. The walls show funerary order, not clinical procedure. Any reconstruction must therefore remain comparative, built from traditions recorded later and separated clearly from his biography. Yet the titles make the imagined sequence plausible. He stood at the palace, above other physicians and dentists, connected with medicinal plants and Serket. He may have entered a room, examined a body, named a condition, selected a preparation, spoken protective words, and decided whether the case could be treated. That possibility brings him closer than the tomb alone can, but it also sharpens the absence. We can describe the structure of Egyptian healing more confidently than we can describe a single day in Tetinebefou's life. The next question, then, is how such healers learned about the body at all through wounds, accidents, embalming, repeated observation, and the difficult knowledge preserved in damaged human remains. The body taught through damage, long before anatomy became a formal science. Ancient Egyptian healers encountered broken bones, cuts, burns, swellings, dislocations, infected wounds, crushed fingers, animal bites, and the consequences of hard labor. Farmers, builders, soldiers, and craftsmen faced sharp tools, heavy loads, falls, fire, metal, dust, and conflict. Domestic life created other accidents. Every wound offered information, though that information came without modern instruments, sterile laboratories, or a complete theory of organs and disease. A physician such as Tetinebefou may have learned partly through repeated comparison. One fracture healed when supported and rested, another remained unstable. Some wounds closed cleanly, while others became hot, swollen, foul, and dangerous. A blow to the head might leave a patient alert, confused, unable to speak, or unable to move. A jaw injury could alter chewing. Damage to the spine might affect the limbs. Observation across many cases could reveal relationships between injury and function, even when the internal mechanism remained hidden. Later Egyptian medical texts preserved this kind of practical reasoning with unusual clarity. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, copied many centuries after Tetinebefou, describes injuries in a sequence of examination, diagnosis, prognosis, and treatment. It cannot be placed in his hands, and it does not prove that he followed the same wording. Yet it shows that Egyptian healing traditions could preserve cumulative knowledge based on bodies repeatedly injured in similar ways. A wound was not merely an omen, it was a pattern that could be inspected and compared. Touch was one of the healer's most important tools. Fingers could detect movement where bone should be firm, swelling where tissue should be flat, heat where skin should be cool, or tenderness marking hidden damage. The physician could test whether a patient could bend a limb, turn the neck, open the mouth, or feel pressure. Such examination did not require knowledge of cells or nerves to produce useful distinctions. It required attention and memory. Bandaging also generated practical knowledge. Linen could hold a dressing in place, support an injured area, compress bleeding, or limit movement. Oils, fats, honey, plant preparations, and mineral substances could be applied for different purposes. Some formed barriers, some absorbed fluid, and some may have reduced microbial growth. Others probably offered little benefit or caused harm. Without controlled trials, successful recovery and treatment could be difficult to separate, but repeated experience still allowed healers to favor certain methods. The preserved dead added another possible source of anatomical familiarity, though this subject is often exaggerated. Mummification involved removing, treating, and arranging parts of the body, but embalmers were not necessarily physicians, and their procedures were shaped by ritual as much as anatomy. The tomb provides no evidence that Tetinebefou performed embalming or studied corpses. Still, Egyptian society contained specialists who handled internal organs and observed bodily structures during funerary preparation. Knowledge could circulate between professions, even if the roots remain unclear. Mummification did not automatically produce modern anatomical understanding. Seeing an organ does not reveal its physiological function. The heart could be recognized as central while the brain's role remained misunderstood. Vessels, tendons, muscles, and organs were interpreted through Egyptian concepts of channels, movement, breath, and bodily balance. These ideas sometimes supported useful observation and sometimes led to mistaken explanations. Practical accuracy in one area could coexist with profound error in another. Human remains preserve evidence that texts do not. Healed fractures show that people survived serious injuries and sometimes received effective stabilization. Poorly aligned bones show the limits of treatment. Trepanation, amputation, and surgical claims require particular caution because damage can occur before death, during embalming, through ancient robbery, or after burial. A cut mark is evidence of a tool, but not automatically evidence of successful surgery. Context determines meaning. A much-discussed Old Kingdom skull studied in recent years carries cut marks around a cancerous lesion. Researchers have proposed that these marks may reflect an attempt to treat the disease or an examination carried out after death. It does not prove that Egyptian physicians routinely operated on cancer. No single interpretation fully accounts for the evidence, and the marks remain separated from any named practitioner. They show curiosity or intervention of some kind, not a complete surgical tradition. Tetinebefou's high rank makes it tempting to assign every advanced possibility to him. The temptation should be resisted. Nothing in his chamber links him to cranial surgery, cancer treatment, amputations, or battlefield operations. No toolkit survives. No skeletal remains allow his own health or manual activity to be examined. His titles demonstrate authority in medicine, dentistry, plants, and Serket's ritual sphere. They do not make him responsible for every medical achievement known from ancient Egypt. Still, a palace physician could draw upon a wide range of cases. Court life included accidents, chronic illness, aging, childbirth, digestive problems, eye complaints, dental pain, and injuries among servants or workers. The royal household also connected him to administrators, priests, craftsmen, and messengers who moved through different environments. Knowledge entered the palace with people. A senior physician may have supervised reports, treatments, and other healers, accumulating experience beyond what one individual could encounter alone. War and organized labor added further lessons. The 6th Dynasty state sent expeditions, managed quarries, moved goods, and maintained building projects. Those activities produced wounds from falls, tools, animals, heat, exhaustion, and conflict. A healer observing the same categories of trauma repeatedly could refine methods of splinting, cleaning, binding, and prognosis. Experience did not guarantee success, but it transformed isolated injuries into recognizable types. The body also resisted interpretation. Internal bleeding might kill without an obvious external wound. Infection could appear after treatment seemed complete. A patient with weakness or pain might suffer from several different conditions that looked similar. Cancer, organ failure, and many chronic diseases remained beyond effective diagnosis. Egyptian healers worked close to the visible surface of illness, reading what could be seen, touched, smelled, or heard. Beyond that boundary lay uncertainty. That uncertainty was not a failure unique to ancient medicine. It was the condition under which all early healing developed. The physician built knowledge from incomplete access to the body, inherited explanations, and outcomes that could not be measured precisely. Ritual filled some gaps, observation narrowed others, and authority held the system together. Tetinebefou's missing body makes this problem personal. Had his remains survived, they might have revealed worn teeth, healed injuries, disease, age, or signs of his own encounters with pain. Instead, the physician's body is absent while the damaged bodies of other Egyptians supply the evidence used to reconstruct his profession. Through fractures, wounds, and preserved tissues, they show what healers could notice. Through infection, deformity, and death, they show what healers could not overcome. The next task is to return to the painted chamber and separate those broad possibilities from what its walls actually prove. The chamber's most persuasive evidence is also the evidence most easily misunderstood. Its painted walls, false door, limestone lintel, vaulted roof, canopic niche, and surviving fragments create the impression of abundance. Yet the tomb is fundamentally a record of loss. Everything fixed to the architecture remains capable of speaking. Almost everything portable has been taken away. This imbalance determines what can be said about Tetinebefou with confidence, and what must remain conjecture. The inscriptions prove that the tomb belonged to Tetinebefou, and that he carried an exceptional group of titles. The decoration proves that considerable resources were devoted to his burial. The ceiling painted to imitate red granite, the carefully incised hieroglyphs, the vivid pigments, and traces of gilding around the niche show skilled labor and elite ambition. The false door and offering scenes reveal how his commemoration was organized. They show the identity he wished to preserve in death, the provisions he expected to receive, and the institutional status on which that identity rested. They do not show him treating a patient. No figure can securely be identified as Tetinebefou examining a wound, preparing a remedy, extracting a tooth, or reciting over a snakebite victim. The vessels painted on the walls belong to the familiar language of funerary offerings. Their contents are not labelled medicines. Food placed before the deceased is not a clinical inventory. A funerary image may reflect objects known in daily life, but it was arranged to sustain the dead, not to document a working medical office. This distinction matters because the tomb's owner invites a medical reading of every object. A jar becomes a drug container, a plant becomes an herb, a metal implement becomes a surgical tool. Yet professional identity does not transform standard funerary imagery into direct evidence of practice. These same kinds of offerings appear in tombs belonging to administrators, priests, and other officials. What changes here is the set of titles written beside them, not the primary ritual purpose of the images. The chamber also contains no confirmed collection of medical equipment. There is no securely identified surgical kit, dental instrument set, medicine chest, written prescription, or labelled botanical specimen. Ancient robbery may explain why such items, if they were ever buried there, are absent. But archaeology cannot treat a possibility as a recovered fact. The correct statement is not that Tetinebefou possessed advanced instruments now lost. It is that the burial was stripped of most portable goods, leaving no verified equipment with which to reconstruct his methods. The robbers appear to have entered with a practical objective. They penetrated below the floor slabs and reached the burial installation, removing the coffin, the body, and valuables that could be carried away. Their actions probably occurred in antiquity, though the precise date is uncertain. They were not preserving a time capsule for modern study. They were searching for material worth taking, and in doing so they erased information whose value they could not have imagined. The missing coffin is one of the greatest losses. Coffins could bear names, titles, religious texts, images, and stylistic features useful for dating. Its material and construction might have indicated expense and workshop practice. The arrangement of its inscriptions could have clarified Tetinebefou's status and perhaps added offices not preserved elsewhere. None of that survives. Reports claiming that archaeologists opened an intact stone sarcophagus in this chamber confuse the discovery with a more dramatic story than the evidence allows. The missing body is an even deeper silence. Had Tetinebefou's remains survived, researchers might have estimated his age at death. Biological sex, stature, dental condition, illnesses, injuries, and aspects of mummification. His teeth could have offered an extraordinary comparison with the title of chief dentist, where abscesses, missing teeth, or treatment marks might have revealed whether the man who led dental specialists suffered the same oral burdens as the society around him. His bones could have shown whether he lived into old age or carried healed trauma. Isotopic or genetic study might have added information about diet, origin, or kinship, depending on preservation. Instead, the physician's own body cannot contribute to the history of his profession. Most grave goods are gone as well. Small surviving fragments may confirm that objects once accompanied the burial, but they do not reconstruct the original assemblage. Containers could have held food, oils, cosmetics, incense, ritual substances, or medicines. Without the objects and their context, these possibilities cannot be separated. Organic residues, labels, sealings, and toolware have vanished along with the things that carried them. The robbery therefore removed far more than wealth. It took away relationships between objects. Archaeological meaning depends on position, what lay beside the body, what stood near the canopic niche, what was sealed, what was opened, and what belonged together. Once an assemblage is disturbed, even objects that remain may lose part of their story. A jar found out of place cannot easily be assigned its original function. A fragment without its container may be impossible to interpret. Context is evidence, and robbery destroys context before it destroys material. Yet the thieves left the chamber largely standing. Carved texts were difficult to monetize, and painted walls could not be carried out through a narrow shaft without immense effort. Their selectivity created the survival now confronting archaeologists. Tetinebefou's public identity, fixed to stone, endured. His private remains and working possessions disappeared. The robbers preserved his titles by ignoring them. Later construction added another accidental layer of protection. A substantial mass built above the area concealed the chamber and shielded it from quarrying. Stone hunters who might have dismantled the walls did not easily reach them. When modern excavators finally documented the room, they encountered architecture that had survived not through uninterrupted respect, but through a sequence of violation, abandonment, burial, and chance. One more irony lies in the survival of colour. Pigment, usually imagined as fragile, outlasted wood, linen, flesh, and portable metal because it adhered to protected stone. The least movable evidence became the most enduring evidence. After conservation and recording, the chamber was closed again. This decision recognizes that discovery can endanger what burial preserved. Pigments exposed to changing air, dust, light, and humidity may deteriorate. The room's value lies not in keeping it permanently open, but in ensuring that its remaining evidence survives. What the tomb proves is therefore both substantial and limited. Tetinebefou was a high-ranking palace physician who also held authority connected with dentistry, medicinal plants, and Serket. He received an elaborately decorated underground burial in the elite cemetery of South Saqqara. His name and offices were carved with exceptional care. Beyond that, the record fractures, his coffin, body, tools, remedies, and patients are absent. The walls tell us what he was called, while the robbery ensures that how he lived and worked remains unresolved. The silence left by the robbery does not make Tetinebefou impossible to study, but it forces every comparison to carry a warning. Other physicians, later medical papyri, model tools, and damaged human remains can illuminate the world around him. None can be inserted into his biography as if they came from his chamber. The task is to build context without replacing a missing life with evidence belonging to someone else. One useful comparison is Shepseska Fank, a royal physician of the 5th dynasty buried at Abusir. His tomb shows that medical specialists could achieve high social standing before Tetinebefou's lifetime. Physicians were not necessarily anonymous attendants working at the margins of power. At least some held prestigious court positions, commanded resources, and secured elaborate commemoration near royal monuments. This broader pattern makes Tetinebefou's status less isolated, but it does not make the two men interchangeable. They lived under different kings, were buried in different cemeteries, and preserved different titles. Such comparisons reveal a professional class more clearly than they reveal individual practice. A physician's tomb can show rank, family connections, religious identity, and access to skilled craftsmen. It rarely provides a complete record of diagnosis or treatment. The monuments were designed for eternity, not for medical instruction. They present office and status in ideal form. A healer remembered as successful may leave no account of failure, uncertainty, or ordinary patience. Model tools found in some Old Kingdom tombs create another temptation. Small copper or stone implements can resemble knives, probes, chisels, or other instruments, and it is easy to call them surgical equipment. Their funerary context complicates that conclusion. Models could symbolize professions, workshops, ritual provision, or the productive activities that sustained the deceased. An object shaped like a tool was not necessarily used on a living body. Without wear, residue, secure context, and a direct association with medicine, its function remains uncertain. No such set was confirmed in Tetinebefou's chamber. Even if comparable objects existed elsewhere, they cannot be transferred into his hands. The robbery allows the possibility that tools once accompanied him, but archaeology cannot inventory objects that are absent. The distinction between plausible and proven must remain visible. That discipline is essential when the surviving record is so uneven. Written medicine offers richer detail and an even greater chronological danger. The Edwin Smith Papyrus preserves a highly organized series of trauma cases. It describes examination, symptoms, diagnosis, prognosis, and treatment in a manner that often feels strikingly practical. The surviving manuscript was copied many centuries after Tetinebefou. Some scholars believe parts of its tradition may be older, but the distance cannot be erased. It shows what Egyptian medical writing could become, not what this particular palace physician certainly read. The Ebers Papyrus presents remedies for numerous complaints and combines ingredients with ritual language. It demonstrates a large written pharmacological tradition, but its surviving form also belongs to the 2nd millennium BCE. The Kahun material includes texts related to reproductive health, while the London Medical Papyrus preserves another mixture of remedies and incantations. Each broadens the picture of Egyptian healing. None names Tetinebefou, his patients, or his 4 offices. The Brooklyn medical papyrus is especially relevant to his association with Serket because it classifies snakes, describes symptoms, and addresses bites. Yet it is later still. It can illustrate the longevity of Egyptian concern with venom and the integration of observation with ritual protection. It cannot prove that Tetinebefou used its categories or repeated its formulas. Traditions can preserve old elements, but they also change through copying, reinterpretation, and new experience. These manuscripts survive because someone wrote, copied, stored, and eventually preserved them. Tetinebefou lived in a literate court culture, so written knowledge may have formed part of his professional environment. That possibility is reasonable. The existence of later papyri, however, does not prove that he owned a medical library or composed treatises. No text was found in his tomb, and no surviving document can be attributed to him. Human remains add a different kind of evidence. Skeletons reveal the burden of dental wear, infection, fractures, arthritis, occupational strain, and disease. They show what patients endured and sometimes what treatment achieved. A well-aligned healed fracture may suggest effective stabilization. A badly deformed bone reveals survival without complete recovery. Lesions around tooth roots document chronic infection. These traces establish the medical problems circulating through Egyptian society, but rarely identify the practitioner who responded. The Old Kingdom skull carrying cut marks around a cancerous lesion has attracted particular attention. The marks may represent an attempt at treatment or an examination after death. Either interpretation would be important, but the evidence does not prove routine cancer surgery, successful intervention, or Tetinebefou's involvement. The individual is not his known patient, and the procedure remains debated. A striking possibility should not be inflated into an established medical system. Comparison therefore works best when it defines boundaries. Other elite physicians show that Tetinebefou belonged to a recognized and prestigious profession. Later papyri demonstrate that Egyptian healers could combine close observation, recipes, prognosis, and spoken ritual. Skeletal remains show the injuries and diseases that demanded care. Model tools warn how easily funerary symbolism can be mistaken for clinical equipment. Together they make his titles intelligible while leaving his personal methods unresolved. They also reveal how unevenly knowledge survives. A later papyrus may preserve detailed instructions without naming the generations who developed them. A tomb may preserve a physician's name without preserving one instruction. A skeleton may preserve disease without preserving the healer's response. Historical medicine is reconstructed from pieces that were never designed to fit together. Tetinebefou stands at the center of this broken archive. His chamber gives an exceptional combination of offices but no clinical text. The papyri provide procedures but no connection to him. Other physicians provide parallels in status but not identity. Human remains provide suffering but rarely treatment. No single category can complete the others. This is why the tomb should not be advertised as a lost medical library or proof of surgery ahead of its time. Its importance is quieter and more substantial. It confirms that the late Old Kingdom could place medical, dental, botanical, and ritual authority within one elite career attached to the palace. It shows that such authority deserved elaborate commemoration. It also exposes the limits of reconstruction with unusual clarity. By the time the comparison ends, Tetinebefou is both more understandable and more elusive. He belongs to a long Egyptian tradition of observation and ritual, but no surviving manuscript speaks in his voice. He shares elite status with other physicians, but their monuments cannot supply his missing actions. The surrounding evidence brings the profession into focus while leaving the practitioner in shadow. Only one final question remains: what does this discovery genuinely change? Once every seductive claim unsupported by the chamber has been removed, what the tomb changes is not the history of surgery, nor the chronology of a miraculous medical revolution. It does not reveal a lost handbook of cures, an intact collection of instruments, or a physician standing centuries ahead of his time. Its importance lies in a subtler place. Tetinebefou's chamber shows that, in the later Old Kingdom, one elite specialist could unite high office in palace medicine with authority over dentists, medicinal plants, and the ritual protection associated with Serket. That combination gives institutional shape to a healing tradition, otherwise known through scattered titles, later papyri, and damaged human remains. The discovery also clarifies how misleading modern categories can be. Tetinebefou was not forced to choose between being a doctor and a ritual practitioner. His society did not arrange practical treatment, sacred speech, botanical substances, prognosis, and divine protection along the same boundaries used today. The four offices were carved together because they formed a coherent identity. A patient's body could be examined, treated with material preparations, protected through spoken ritual, and placed under a deity's care within a single response. The tomb does not prove that every method worked, but it proves that these forms of authority could converge at the highest level of the royal household. His position matters as much as his techniques. The title connected with the palace places medical knowledge inside the machinery of kingship. Healing was not merely a domestic craft or temple service operating beyond state institutions. At least some physicians belonged to formal hierarchies, supervised specialists, controlled resources, and secured burial among the elite near royal monuments. Tetinebefou's chamber reveals the social elevation of such knowledge. The person responsible for pain, disease, teeth, plants, and venom could stand close enough to power for those responsibilities to define his eternal identity. Yet the discovery also imposes limits. No named pharaoh appears in the surviving evidence. Tetinebefou should not be confidently called the personal physician of Pepi II. He served under an unidentified successor of Pepi I, while artistic affinities suggest, but do not prove, a date near the reign of Pepi II. No patient is named. No treatment is described. The tomb offers no basis for claiming that he performed advanced dental surgery, maintained a vast medicinal garden, or possessed the medical papyri preserved from later centuries. Its value depends on resisting those additions. The same restraint applies to the room itself. The burial is not an enormous intact mastaba newly opened with a mummy inside. It is a small underground vaulted chamber reached through a shaft. While most of the surface structure has disappeared, the coffin and body were removed by ancient robbers. Most grave goods vanished with them. The finely painted vessels, foods, and offerings on the walls belong to funerary ritual and cannot be treated as a catalogue of medicines. These corrections do not make the find less compelling. They make its survival stranger. The portable evidence disappeared, while the painted claims of status remained fixed to stone. The chamber's artistic quality adds another dimension to that status. Incised signs only a few millimeters high were filled with vivid color. Limestone was painted to resemble expensive red granite. Gilding once caught the light around the canopic niche. Such details required time, skilled labor, and resources. They suggest that Tetinebefou's offices were not empty decorations added to an ordinary burial. His commemoration was carefully constructed to display rank and permanence. Even in a compact underground room, the visual language of elite privilege surrounded his name. The latest field reporting has not transformed that interpretation into something more sensational. Subsequent work at Saqqara has continued to refine the cemetery and its historical setting, but it has not produced a body, a medical archive, or a secure king for Tetinebefou. The direct archaeological report from the discovery remains central, because it records the chamber before later retellings enlarge it. Part of the find's legacy is the distinction between what archaeologists documented and what headlines preferred to imagine. What survives is enough to alter the portrait of Old Kingdom healing in a precise way. Tetinebefou's 4 titles show specialization and integration at once. Dentistry existed as a named field with hierarchy, even though operative evidence remained scarce. Medicinal plants could fall under a rare official responsibility, even though no list or garden survives. Serket's ritual specialists could belong to the management of venom and danger, even though no treatment sequence is preserved. Palace medicine could command high rank, even though its patients remain anonymous. Each title opens a field, and each field ends at an evidentiary boundary. That boundary is not an inconvenience to be hidden, it is the central historical fact. Tetinebefou is visible as an official and nearly invisible as a practitioner. We know the categories through which his society honoured him, but not the decisions he made in a sick room. We cannot hear him pronounce a prognosis, watch him select a plant, or know whether his hands ever removed a damaged tooth. We cannot identify a patient who recovered because of his care or one he could not save. The record preserves authority without outcome. This asymmetry may be the tomb's deepest contribution. It reminds us that ancient medicine was lived by individuals whose knowledge rarely survives in personal form. Practices are reconstructed from manuals copied later, bones without names, titles without duties, and images created for death rather than instruction. Tetinebefou gives those abstractions a human centre. He was not merely evidence for a profession. He was a person who learned, advanced, gained trust, and was commemorated through 4 remarkable offices. But the evidence does not allow the centre to become a complete portrait. The discovery, therefore, changes history by sharpening its questions. It asks how palace medicine was organised, who trained its specialists, where plants were stored, what dental care meant before operative evidence became clear, and how ritual authority functioned during venom emergencies. It encourages comparison with other physicians and later papyri, while warning against collapsing centuries into one timeless system. It shows that the boundaries between healer, administrator, botanist, dentist, and priest were more permeable than modern labels suggest. Above all, it restores one name to the landscape of Saqqara. The mission went searching for another official and found Tetinebefou beneath the architecture that had hidden him for millennia. His chamber does not overturn the history of medicine. It gives that history a rare, richly painted point of contact with an individual career. The walls tell us what the ancient court believed was worth remembering: rank, expertise, ritual authority, and a name placed where offerings could reach it. They also show what remembrance could not guarantee. The institution survived in titles, the working life disappeared. When the chamber is closed again, darkness returns without erasing the colours. The red lines across the ceiling still imitate stone more costly than the limestone beneath them. Blue and green remain inside the carved signs. A faint trace of gold still marks the place prepared for organs that are no longer there. Nothing moves in the narrow room, yet the walls continue performing the task assigned to them more than 4,000 years ago. They hold a name against forgetting. The silence is not empty so much as selective. It allows the official identity to survive while withholding the private work behind it. Every recovered sign narrows the distance to him, and every missing object restores that distance again. Beyond the sealed shaft, Saqqara stretches beneath sun and wind, layered with monuments whose owners once expected memory to last forever. Some survive as famous kings, others remain a broken title, a painted face, or a few stones beneath later walls. Tetinebefou occupies that quieter company. His status is still legible, but his voice is gone. The people who came to him in pain are gone. The plants he handled have lost their scent. The words he spoke beside a bed, whether practical instruction or sacred protection, left no echo that archaeology can recover. Perhaps that is why the chamber feels so intimate. It does not offer the comfort of completion. It preserves the outline of a life while leaving its substance absent. Medicine, plants, ritual, and divine protection once met in one career. But the successes and failures of that career remain beyond reach. The tomb asks us to respect both the knowledge that survived and the silence surrounding it. Time often preserves human stories unevenly. Stone outlasts memory, but only the words chosen for stone. Colour survives while bodies vanish. Titles endure while ordinary actions disappear. A man can return to history as chief physician, chief dentist, director of medicinal plants, and servant of Serket, yet remain unknown in the moments that mattered most to those he treated. And so the final image is not of a magician performing wonders or a surgeon holding impossible tools. It is of a small underground room, emptied long ago, its painted ceiling suspended above a missing coffin. In that stillness, Tetinebefou's name remains clear. Everything he was called is visible. Almost everything he did is not. The colours wait in darkness, keeping the mystery intact.